The shipping lane near the border had a rule that every pilot learned in their first month: don't fly too close to the lump. It was not a dangerous rule to break. Nothing had ever happened to anyone who flew near it. That was exactly why the rule felt strange. Traders passed the giant tumbling rock 1,000 times a year, and 1,000 times a year nothing happened. It just sat there, spinning slowly, cold and dark, exactly as it had for 6 years. On the border relay platform, a young scanner officer named Tolly was running the evening sweep. Tolly had joined the Combine's monitoring service 2 years ago, mostly because the pay was steady and the work was boring. Boring was good. Boring meant nobody died on your shift. Tonight's sweep was routine. Tolly moved through readings the way a person flips through old letters, not expecting to find anything new. Cargo ship, empty freighter, patrol drone, and there, at the edge of the lane, the familiar blob of the lump. Tolly almost scrolled past it. Then something made an old habit kick in: check the numbers, not just the shape. The lump's spin rate was logged at the bottom of the screen. Tolly glanced at it out of habit and then looked again, slower this time. 6 years ago, the tumble rate had been logged at a certain value. Tonight, the value was the same, not close, not similar, the same down to the decimal. Tolly sat back. Real rocks did not spin like that. A drifting asteroid picked up tiny nudges from gravity, from dust, from stray radiation pressure. Over 6 years, even a small nudge should have changed the numbers by some tiny fraction. This hadn't moved at all. Tolly pulled up the full spin history. Every entry, every year, was identical. It was like looking at a photograph of a wheel and being told it had been rolling the whole time. There were 2 explanations. Either something was keeping the lump perfectly steady on purpose, or every scanner on the platform, going back 6 years, had been broken in exactly the same way. Tolly filed a short report and sent it up the chain, expecting nothing. An hour later, a message came back from the shift supervisor, a tired, older alien named Corin who had clearly been asleep. "Sensor drift," Corin wrote. "Recalibrate your unit before next shift. Don't waste my night with rocks." Tolly almost let it go. It would have been easy to let it go. Nobody got promoted for arguing about a rock, but something about those identical numbers itched at the back of Tolly's mind, the same way a puzzle itches when one piece looks like it belongs somewhere else entirely. So Tolly did something small and quiet. Instead of recalibrating the sensor, Tolly ran a manual check against a second, independent instrument on the far side of the platform. If the first sensor was broken, the second one would show something different. It didn't. The second sensor agreed with the first, down to the same decimal. Tolly sent a second, more detailed report. This one included both readings side by side, along with a note explaining, as calmly as possible, that a natural object could not behave this way. The reply this time came faster and colder. "We have bigger concerns than debris," Corin wrote. "The patrol budget was cut again this quarter. I'm not requesting a survey ship over a rock that has done nothing for 6 years. Do your job and stop looking for problems." Tolly read the message twice, then set it aside, unconvinced, but out of options. There was no one else to escalate to tonight, and morning shift would bring someone new to argue with instead. Outside the platform's viewport, the lump continued its slow, silent turn, exactly as it always had. To any casual observer, it was nothing more than an old chunk of rock left over from some ancient collision, drifting on a lazy, predictable path through empty space. But deep inside it, far below layers of dust and stone that had been carefully placed rather than naturally formed, quiet systems that had been idle for years took note of something new. A second, independent sensor had just cross-checked the spin rate against the first. That had never happened before. In 6 years of being scanned, prodded, and ignored by passing traffic, this was the first time anyone had looked closely enough to notice the truth. The systems logged the event, compared it against a long list of conditions written years ago by people who were no longer anywhere near this stretch of space, and filed the incident under a category simply labeled "Attention Increasing. Monitor." Nothing moved, no lights flickered, no alarms sounded. The lump kept spinning at its perfect, impossible, unchanging rate, patient as it had always been. Tolly shut down the console for the night, unaware that somewhere out in the dark, a very old and very careful watcher had just opened one eye. The drift coin was not a proud ship. It was patched together from 3 different hull types, ran on an engine that coughed more than it purred, and smelled faintly of burnt wiring no matter how many times the crew tried to fix it. But it was theirs, and for a small crew of smugglers running unlicensed goods through the border lane, that counted for something. Captain Rask had been flying this route for 11 years. In that time, the lump had become something like a landmark, a joke, and a superstition all rolled into one. Every smuggler crew had a story about it. Some said it was an old graveyard ship, packed with the bones of a war nobody talked about anymore. Some said it was just a rock, and the stories were made up by bored pilots with nothing better to do on long hauls. Rask leaned toward the second explanation, mostly because believing the first one made the job harder. Tonight, the job was already hard enough. The drift coin's left engine had started stuttering an hour ago, losing power in short bursts that made the whole ship shudder. Worse, a combine patrol vessel was sweeping the lane earlier than usual, which meant Rask's usual route was blocked. "We need somewhere to sit still and fix this," said Bine, the ship's young engineer, from the back compartment. Bine's voice had the particular strain of someone who had said a version of this sentence many times tonight already. Rask looked at the sensor display and saw only one real option: the lump. It was big enough to block a patrol scan if they tucked in close on the far side, and it had never bothered anyone in 11 years of Rask flying past it. "Get us behind the rock," Rask said. "Quick fix, quiet fix, then we're gone." The drift coin limped into the shadow of the lump and killed most of its power, leaving only life support and a thin trickle of energy to the engines Bine was frantically working on. From the outside, the ship would look like nothing more than a dark smear against a darker rock. Bine crawled into the engine housing with a scanner in hand, muttering about burnt coils and cracked lines. Halfway through the inspection, the scanner beeped in a way it wasn't supposed to. "That's odd," Bine said, mostly to no one. "What's odd?" Rask called from the cockpit. "Getting a heat reading, not from our engine, from outside." Bine tapped the scanner twice, as if that would fix a bad reading. It didn't. "It's coming from the rock." Rask didn't answer right away. Rocks didn't produce heat, not real heat, not the kind that showed up clearly on a scanner meant for engines and reactors. Dust didn't warm itself up out of nowhere. "Recalibrate it," Rask said, though the words came out less certain than intended. "I did twice." Bine's voice had lost its complaining edge and picked up something closer to fear. "Captain, there's something warm inside that rock." Rask left the cockpit and floated back to check the reading directly. The numbers on the small screen were faint but steady, a thin, deep pulse of heat buried far below the surface, in a pattern too even to be some pocket of trapped gas or mineral reaction. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the viewport, the lump continued turning slowly, indifferent and silent, exactly as it always had. "Could be an old wreck," Rask said finally, more to break the silence than because it felt true. "Something crashed into it centuries ago, left some kind of power source buried in the rubble." "Sure," Bine said, in the tone of someone who did not believe that at all. "Can we please go now?" Rask agreed. Some jobs weren't worth the risk, and sitting next to a mysteriously warm rock definitely qualified. The engine, half-fixed at best, sputtered back to life as Rask eased the drift coin away from the lump's shadow. Then the engine died completely. Not stuttered, died. Every light on the console dimmed at once, and the ship went dark except for the dim emergency glow along the floor panels. "Bine," Rask said carefully, "tell me that was supposed to happen." "It was not supposed to happen," Bine said, voice climbing higher. Outside, unnoticed by either of them in the panic of dead systems, a thin seam of light flickered briefly along the lump's surface, there and gone in less than a second, like something underneath had shifted just slightly in its sleep. Not far away, the Combine patrol ship that had forced Rask into hiding in the first place continued its slow sweep of the lane, completely unaware that it too was drifting closer to the same quiet, waiting rock with every passing minute. Tolly did not go home after the shift ended. That was against the rules, technically, but nobody checked closely as long as the workstation was returned to standby before the next crew arrived. Instead, Tolly pulled every scan of the lump from the archive going back 6 full years and started reading through them one by one. It was slow, tedious work. Most of the entries were nothing, routine passes, brief flickers of instrument noise, the kind of small glitches every sensor produced from time to time. Any single one of them meant nothing on its own. Corin had been right about that much. But Tolly wasn't looking at them one at a time. Tolly was looking for a pattern across all of them together. By the third hour, one began to emerge. Every few months, there was a tiny spike in heat, always in the same range, always lasting only a few seconds before vanishing. Every year or so, a brief flicker of radiation appeared on a frequency nobody used anymore, gone before any automated system flagged it as important. Alone, each event looked like nothing. Stacked side by side across 6 years, they looked like breathing. Tolly sat very still for a long moment, staring at the timeline on the screen, then got up and walked straight to the station commander's office without bothering to knock first. Commander Vel was not pleased about the interruption, but something in Tolly's expression made her put down the report she was reading and actually listen. "I think the lump isn't natural," Tolly said, laying the timeline out on her desk display. "I think it's something with power running through it, on some kind of low cycle. Sleeping, maybe." Vel studied the pattern for a long moment, unconvinced but no longer dismissive. "You built this from 6 years of noise." "I built this from 6 years of the same noise, showing up in the same places, at intervals too even to be random," Tolly said. "A rock doesn't breathe on a schedule." Vel was quiet for a while. Then, mostly to end the conversation rather than out of real belief, she authorized a single scout drone to fly a close pass and record detailed imaging. "One drone," she said. "If it comes back with nothing, this is finished." "Understood." Tolly agreed immediately, already heading for the control room to guide the flight personally. The drone launched an hour later, a small unmanned probe meant for exactly this kind of close inspection. It crossed the distance to the lump in under 20 minutes, cameras rolling the entire way, feeding a live image back to Tolly's station. The footage showed exactly what everyone expected at first: gray, pitted rock, patches of frozen dust, the dull surface of something that had been drifting, untouched, for a very long time. Tolly watched closely as the drone banked along one side, scanning for any seam or irregularity. Then, for less than 2 seconds, the camera passed over something that did not belong. A shape, faint and half buried under a thin layer of dust, etched into the rock rather than formed by it. Straight lines, deliberate angles, something made, not something natural. Before Tolly could get a clear freeze frame, the feed dissolved into static and did not come back. Tolly tried every channel, every backup frequency, and got nothing. The drone was gone, or at least silent, its last transmission cut off mid-image. Shaking slightly, Tolly pulled the final clear frame from the recording buffer and ran it through a symbol database, more out of habit than real hope of a match. The search came back almost immediately, which was strange in itself, because most obscure symbols took hours to cross-reference properly. This one didn't. It matched something already flagged in the archive as historically significant, an old military insignia, catalogued decades ago and attached to a single, brief note. Faction presumed extinct following the end of hostilities at the border. No confirmed contact since. Tolly carried the image straight back to Commander Vel's office without waiting for morning. Vel looked at the symbol for a long time before speaking. When she finally did, her voice had lost every trace of the tired dismissal from earlier that night. "That insignia," she said slowly, "belonged to the humans." Tolly felt the room go very quiet. "I thought they were gone. extinct, or driven off after the war? Vel did not answer right away. She was already reaching for a secure channel, already calling for the nearest patrol vessel to divert toward the lump immediately, no longer treating it as a rock at all. To understand why a single insignia could make a station commander go pale, it helps to understand what most of the galaxy believed about the border war and how wrong that belief actually was. Decades ago, the Combine and its allies fought a long, grinding conflict against a species most people simply called the humans. The war was slow and exhausting for both sides, fought across a scattering of border systems that nobody particularly wanted, but nobody could afford to lose either. Official Combine history taught that the humans, worn down by years of fighting, eventually stopped answering hails, pulled back from the border, and were never heard from again. Most scholars listed them as extinct or scattered beyond recovery. It made for a comfortable story, one where the Combine had outlasted a stubborn enemy through sheer patience and resolve. The truth, known to almost no one still alive in Combine leadership, was simpler and far less comfortable. Humanity had not lost. They had made a calculated decision to stop fighting a war that offered nothing worth the cost of continuing, and withdrew on their own terms rather than being pushed out. Before leaving the border entirely, they quietly left a handful of dormant assets behind, disguised and forgotten, meant to sit still and watch in case anyone ever needed reminding that the border was not as undefended as it looked. One of those assets had been drifting near the shipping lane for 6 years, disguised as a lifeless chunk of rock, doing exactly what it had been built to do: nothing until it needed to do otherwise. Inside the lump, systems that had spent years running on the barest trickle of power were now fully active for the first time since the ship went dark. A drone had approached and captured an image of the hidden markings along the hull. A second vessel, small and unarmed, had lingered directly in its shadow with a failing engine. Independent sensors on the nearby platform had cross-checked its spin rate against each other, something no one had bothered to do in 6 years of quiet observation. And now, according to the same monitoring systems, a Combine patrol vessel was changing course, heading directly toward it at speed. None of these events alone would have been enough. Together, they crossed a threshold written into the ship's original standing orders long ago: if there was a credible chance of exposure, and if a hostile military vessel was closing in, remain hidden no longer. The patrol ship pushed hard toward the coordinates Commander Vel had sent, engines straining, crew tense, and unsure exactly what they were racing toward. Its captain, a cautious officer named Orsa, had been told only that the lump might not be a natural object, and that whatever it was could be connected to a faction everyone believed had vanished long ago. It was not much information to go on, but it was enough to keep every hand on the bridge gripping their console a little tighter than usual. Nearby, the drift coin remained dead in space, its engine fully failed, its small crew watching the approaching patrol ships, lights grow slowly brighter through the front viewport with a mixture of relief and dread. Rescue was coming, technically, though neither Rask nor Bine felt particularly rescued yet. Then, without warning, the surface of the lump began to change. It started small, a thin crack splitting open along one side, venting a slow cloud of frost and dust into the vacuum. Then another crack opened, then another, following seams that had clearly been placed there on purpose rather than formed by any natural collision. Loose plates of rock, carefully fitted years ago to look like nothing more than uneven stone, began drifting free in near silence, tumbling away into the dark. From the patrol ship's bridge, Captain also watched the readings spike and stared at the growing cloud of debris on the main screen, unable to make sense of what she was seeing. "That's not an asteroid breaking apart," her sensor officer said quietly. "That's something coming out of it." Bine, watching the same event unfold from the drift coin's dead cockpit, grabbed Rask's arm without thinking. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing useful left to say. Slowly, deliberately, the last of the rocky shell peeled away, and something vast and dark and unmistakably built began to emerge from underneath, hidden until this exact moment, patient for 6 long years, finally ready to be seen. For a long moment, Nobody on the patrol ship's bridge said anything at all. The rocky shell that had passed as an asteroid for 6 years was gone, scattered into a slow drifting cloud around a hull that had been hiding beneath it the entire time. What remained was smooth, dark, and enormous, far larger than any ship the Combine had fielded since the border war ended. Faint lines of light traced along its surface as systems long dormant came fully back online, section by section, like a creature stretching after a long sleep. Captain also gripped the edge of her console, watching numbers scroll across a screen that made no sense against anything she had trained for. Mass readings alone put the vessel well beyond anything in the current Combine fleet. Power output readings were worse. Cloaking field, her sensor officer said, voice unsteady. It wasn't a rock with something inside it. The whole thing was cloaked. The rock shell was just cover on top of that. A shimmer rippled across the space around the newly revealed ship. One last distortion settling as the cloaking field finished shutting down completely, leaving nothing hidden anymore. Aboard the drift coin, Rask and Bine stared through the front viewport in stunned silence. Their ship was still dead in space, powerless, sitting directly in the shadow of something that could have ended them without ever announcing itself. Weapon systems along the newly revealed hull began lighting up in slow, deliberate sequence, not aimed, not firing, simply visible, a plain demonstration that they existed and worked perfectly well after 6 years of silence. It was not a threat, it was a statement. Then a channel opened, calm and unhurried, reaching both the patrol ship and the dead smuggler vessel at once. "This is Commander Dane of the long-range watch vessel's steady hand," the voice said, level and unbothered, as if this were an entirely ordinary Tuesday. "Apologies for the surprise. We've been sitting here a while." Captain also forced her voice to work. "Identify your affiliation, state your intentions." "Affiliation's easy enough," Dane said. "We are human. As for intentions, we don't currently have any that involve either of your ships coming to harm, so you can stand your crews down if that helps." On the bridge of the patrol ship, nobody moved for a long moment. The idea that humanity still existed at all, let alone that it had a fully functioning warship parked quietly in a busy shipping lane for 6 years, was not something anyone had prepared for tonight. "You've been here the entire time," Orsa said slowly, "watching everything that passed through this lane." "That's the job," Dane said simply. "Border watch. Low profile, mostly quiet. We don't interfere unless something forces the issue, and until tonight nothing had." Bine, still gripping Rask's arm on the drift coin, finally found their voice. "The heat readings, the thermal bleed we picked up earlier, that was you." "Minimal life support venting," Dane confirmed, sounding almost apologetic about it. "We try to keep it low enough that nobody notices, but your ship parked closer than most, and our margins aren't perfect after 6 years running quiet." Rask managed a short, disbelieving laugh, more nerves than humor. "We hid from a patrol ship behind what turned out to be your warship." "Small galaxy," Dane said, and there was something almost like warmth in the voice, despite everything. Also recovered enough composure to ask the question that mattered most to her chain of command. "Why now? Why reveal yourselves at all, after staying hidden this long?" "Wasn't really our choice anymore," Dane said. "Once your drone got close enough to photograph the hull markings, and once your ship started closing in fast enough to look like trouble, staying hidden stopped being an option. We don't pick fights, but we also don't wait around to get hit first. Given the choice between staying cloaked and letting your ship ram into us in the dark, decloaking seemed friendlier." That landed hard on the bridge. Also realized slowly that her own approach, urgent and half-blind, could easily have ended in disaster if the ship ahead of her had been even slightly less patient. "The smuggler vessel is disabled," Dane continued, businesslike now. "We'll assist if there's no objection. No charges filed on our end, obviously not our jurisdiction, and frankly not our problem to make worse." Rask, still processing the fact that rescue was coming from a legendary, supposedly extinct warship, managed only a single word: "Appreciated." Behind the calm exchange of words, Both alien crews were quietly absorbing the same enormous realization. Everything they had been taught about humanity, gone, defeated, faded into extinction after the border war, was wrong. Not exaggerated, not outdated. Simply, completely wrong, and had been for 6 years, sitting in plain sight the entire time. The steady hand towed the drift coin clear of the debris field with an ease that made Rask's battered engine problems feel almost embarrassing by comparison. A tow line extended from the human warship, gentle and precise, getting the smaller ship towards safer space without a single jolt along the way. Bine watched the operation from the cockpit window, still too stunned to fully relax. "They could have just left us," Bine said quietly. "They could have done a lot of things," Rask replied, watching the enormous hull glide alongside them. "Didn't." Aboard the patrol ship, Captain Orsa kept a cautious formation alongside the steady hand as both vessels moved back toward combine space, no longer pretending this was a routine patrol. Commander Dane's voice checked in periodically, calm and courteous, offering navigation assistance and confirming there was no intention of following the patrol ship past the border markers. "We're not looking to restart anything," Dane said at one point, almost offhand. "The war ended because continuing it stopped making sense for anyone. That hasn't changed. We just prefer people know the border isn't as quiet as it looks." Orsa didn't have a good response to that. She simply logged it, along with everything else from tonight, for a report she suspected would end up read by far more senior officers than her own commander. Back on the relay platform, Commander Vel called Toli into her office as soon as the full incident report came through. Toli expected a reprimand, half convinced that somehow, despite everything, this would still be treated as an overreaction. Instead, Vel slid the report across the desk, already annotated. "Your original spin rate analysis is attached at the front," she said. "Command wants to know who caught this 6 months before anyone else even glanced twice at it." "I only checked because the numbers didn't sit right," Toli said. "That's the job," Vel said, echoing without knowing it the same simple words Dane had used earlier that night. "You did it when nobody else bothered. That gets remembered." Toli left the office lighter than expected, the exhaustion of the last 2 days finally catching up all at once, but carrying something new alongside it, the quiet, unfamiliar feeling of having been right when it mattered. Word of the incident did not stay contained for long. Rask and Bine, still shaken but very much alive, told the story more than once in more than one dockside bar over the following weeks, and each retelling spread a little further than the last. A dead rock, a hidden warship, a calm human commander who could have destroyed 2 ships without lifting a finger and chose, instead, to offer a tow line. The story reached traders, then station officials, then eventually made its way into formal briefings across several sectors of combine space. Old assumptions, comfortable ones built on decades of believing humanity gone or broken, did not collapse overnight, but they cracked, visibly and permanently, in a way that could not be smoothed over by old textbooks or outdated intelligence reports. Combine leadership convened an emergency session within days, quietly reassessing everything they thought they knew about the border, the war's true ending, and just how much technology and patience humanity had spent the last few decades quietly developing out of sight. Far from all of that discussion, aboard the steady hand, Commander Dane stood near the observation deck, watching ordinary shipping traffic resume through the lane below, cautious now, but resuming nonetheless. A young officer approached from behind, still getting used to the ship, no longer needing to pretend to be a rock. "Cover's blown," the officer said. "Command's going to want us relocated." "Figured as much," Dane said, unbothered. "Good run, though, 6 quiet years, and we only had to raise our voice the once." "Where next?" Dane considered the question for a moment, watching a small, unlicensed freighter drift past far below, utterly unaware of how closely it had just been observed. "Somewhere better hidden," Dane said finally, a faint, knowing smile in the words. "This can't be the only quiet spot worth watching." The officer didn't ask further, understanding without needing it spelled out that tonight's reveal, as dramatic as it had felt to everyone else in the sector, was likely only one small piece of a much larger, much quieter picture. Somewhere else, in some other overlooked shipping lane, in some other lazy patch of drifting debris, another watcher was very possibly already waiting, patient as ever, content to be mistaken for nothing at all until the moment it mattered.